Okay, so next on our agenda, also very interesting stuff. The kings in your castle, all the lame threats that own you but will never make you famous. I think it's about demystifying APTs with some examples, and talk is given by Marian Marszalek and Rafael Vino. Well known and welcome back, right?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our talk about the kings in your castle. You might recognize that title. It's similar to a song title that's been used in a movie called The Ghost in the Shell. And we use the title because it resembles APTs. Because APTs are threats that usually stick in your network and you don't know about them while they're the kings in your castle. We're very happy to be here today at Troopers. It's my third Troopers, and I'm happy to come back every year. It's a wonderful conference. My name is Marian Marszalek.
And my name is Rafael Vino, and I work at Circle, so National Cert in Luxembourg, and for the private sector. And I do coding and LaTeX. That's why Marion took care of doing the slides.
Right, I'm a professional threat detector. I reverse engineer malware, and I have a lot of fun in doing PowerPoint slides. That's why we have a very funny slide deck for you today.
So APT, yeah, it's just a fancy name for something that is in your network, and you were just didn't see for like a long time usually. So that's not really like, it's a fancy name for just stuff that you missed. And yeah, so let's move on. APT, the way it goes, it's basically usually you get the attacker gets information, use it to break in, discover like what can be taken out, collect stuff and get stuff out. That's usually the way APT work. And yeah, they will use, as you will see, tools that are sometimes not the most advanced ones.
There's a lot of excitement around APTs. The terminus APT has gotten a little bit ridiculous. That's why we put the A and the P in brackets here. So usually you have a threat that's like stuck in your network. First, you don't find it for a long time. Second, you think it's advanced because usually you or your security products don't detect it, don't understand it. That's why they call it APT. But an APT is defined by the fact that it's targeted. So someone had the thought that he wants to hack you as an entity and steal data from you. But usually, you shouldn't feel too special about it if you're hit by an APT, because APTs usually hit more than one target. And the chances that you are the only victim of one APT are very low. So there's a lot of research going on finding or researching APTs, and we took that as a base to search for correlations, because usually when one guy finds an APT and reports it, someone else might have found that APT way earlier and reported about it already. And if in practice we as analysts had that information always at hand, we'd be a lot happier and a lot faster. So we got to our actual topic. Today we present our research on APT correlations. We took a data set that we introduced shortly, which represents information about APT reports that have been out in the public, and we took the attributes from all these reports and correlated them.
And the tool we used for that is called MISP. It's a tool developed that we developed at Circle. And the idea is that you find attributes. So you have a report from a vendor, or you have an event, something happening in your company, and you want to find out if someone already know about it, or if it's something that is like completely new, or if you have indicators such as domains, or malware samples, or IPs that have already been seen somewhere else. So the idea is to basically have one central repository in your organization where you can put everything and find out correlations. And you can also use MISP in a distributed system by connecting it to other platforms. We have a big platform at Circle, and if you want to have access to it, just contact me after the talk. But the idea of MISP is really to have events and to find out correlations with a small amount of events. What we did for this research is to get a lot of events and find correlations and find out if we have duplicates and so on. So all the techniques, all the tools and techniques and procedures that we can find in MISP, and we use all those ones to find correlations between all those events. So the correlations were on IP, domain, URL for the network attributes, file name, hashes for more the samples, the malware samples, compilation timestamps, because it's really interesting to find out, like, it can be obviously obfuscated and can be changed, but like it's sometimes the attacker will just miss and leave it there. Timing of the attacks, when it happens, like if we have something happening in 2 years ago and the same indicators come again this year, it's interesting to know. Who is information, like yeah, who registers the domain. And we did a lot of grouping on different attributes. and the source of the report, if it comes from a vendor or if it comes from a company that has been targeted or just discovered something, it's really interesting to know all those informations. That's all the tools we developed. That's quite a lot, not like a lot of the tools were already developed before, but we just used them, and we had a few more stuff we developed especially for this presentation. And that's the way the whole system works. Yeah, it's like a nice homemade schema. So the idea is... Yeah.
Without a long list of tools, it's a bit hard to understand, so we'll try to make it clearer.
Yeah, so that's obviously clearer, right? I'm going to explain it a bit further. So at the beginning, you have MISP with a lot of events coming from vendor companies with some descriptors, like the name of the name of the report, or where it comes from, some like info, the name of the attack, the name of the tool used, and so on. The date, like when it has been reported, and also some really interesting information we used a bit later, CVE number, so vulnerability report to see if the same vulnerability is used multiple times. So a tool we developed especially for this talk is a Bloom filter system to put all the attributes of MISP at one place, and you can query it really fast. The main reason we developed that is that because we got a lot of samples from MISP, and we got them from different places, like VT and some closed repositories, but then we didn't have any correlation between our samples and the attributes, so we need to match them. We need to match them back together. So that's why, to reconcile all the events, we use a Bloom filter system in Redis to do like a lot of queries. From the samples, we took a bunch of data out, a bunch of attributes out. So first of all, PE file. I don't know if you know PE file. It's a Python library that will help you to get out timestamps, import hashes, entry points, the amount of sections you have in the file, and the original file name, which is also really, really interesting, as we'll see later. Then we also use IDA-Python to get API calls out, and SSDeep. I don't know if you know SSDeep. It's a really interesting hashing system. It's a fuzzy hash. So the idea is that you can correlate similarities between samples, like at the block level. Like you can it's going to split the sample in multiple small parts and create an hash on it, and then show you where the differences are. So all those attributes, we put them together into a Redis and SQLite database. We merged it with all the descriptors from the MISP events, and made groups and enjoyed it. So that's the amount of data we took. So yeah, first of all, in MISP, we have around 3,000 events. So we just took a small portion of it. And Mario is going to explain you how we chose it.
Yes, after dumping all of MISP, we ended up with a lot of data. So the thing with MISP is there is various contributors, and they contribute reports that you see as relevant in terms of threat detection. And usually MISP is used for generating IOCs for specific events that you can use in your network. So it's not technically built for big data, if you want to call 500 events big data. So we went on to go through the events that were in MISP and evaluate every event based on where the data came from. So we looked, was there a report from a vendor attached, which indicated was a targeted threat? Was the malware that's been used technically usually used in targeted threats? And this way we came up to these 501 events that we said this has to be targeted malware. That's why we want to analyze it. Well, then we figured out we still have a lot of duplicates in there, and did another round of contextual reduction of the data set, and had, in the end, 326 events, which dedicatedly described APT attacks or events. So in the end, we had two data sets, which is once the big number of samples up there, 15,000, which is all for understanding APT malware, or malware being used in the context of APTs. And the second data set, which is these about 9,000 samples, which then kept the correlation with the dedicated events. So with the connection from sample to event, we can add information about the actual attack, because these events are associated with reports or with more information that's being stored in MISP. So we have an actual context for our malware. The graphic you see in the background here is more an illustration, but actually the statistic shows the different file types that have been used. And one thing we found out in there is that most of the malware that was kept within our APT events was Windows malware, of course, Win32, exe, and DLLs, but also drivers and partially 64-bit binaries for Windows. The rest was usually documents or data being used for exploitation. And the amount of Mac OS X binaries and Linux ELF binaries is actually really, really low. The data sets altogether, to wrap it up, we had, of course, our events with the event IDs, with the associated samples. So the samples and the hashes. We had the network indicators that were stored in MISP, which are usually extracted from the vendor reports that go into MISP. We had vulnerabilities that are usually reported with the vendor report into MISP. We had the described PE binary attributes, which we gathered with PE file, with the Python library. And of course, we had binary intestines, a little script for either Python to get out data from within the binary, because with PE file, you usually can analyze the header information, or let's say the metadata about the binary, but you can look into the binary of what's happening there. And yeah, for correlations, we picked 1, 2, or many of all our attributes. But first of all, before we get to the actual results, we want to talk about the fun facts that we found within our data sets.
First of all, I don't know if you already use SSDeep, but I realized last week that you can actually have a lot of really interesting collisions when you use it. So don't use it for just as a normal hash. For example, if you have a binary and you append some padding at the end, some null padding at the end, well, the SSDeep hash is going to be exactly the same. So that's, yeah, I didn't know that. It's interesting to know. But that's not the only thing. Then if you use SSDeep, the tool, command line tool, and you compare two binaries, it's going to give you a value, the percentage of correlations. And on all those hashes, even if you see they are slightly different, at the end, those ones, this one is a bit more, and then there's a few changes here. I mean, you have a few differences in the hash itself, but if you use the command line tool, you have 100% correlation. Good to know, because if you just rely on that and don't look at the hash, you will miss that there is some differences. And another example, this one, it's another sample, but that's all the differences in the file. But this one, both binaries will match as 100% similarities. So it's clearly the malware is really, really close. It's almost the same, and it definitely comes from the same campaign, but it's different. So when you use SSDeep, just make sure that you know and you just assume that you will have 100% similarity with differences in the files. But it's still really interesting because those ones are definitely related.
Another interesting finding that we had that was kind of unexpected was that we found a big group of samples that came with the same compilation timestamp being set to around 10 p.m. on the 19th of June in 1992. These samples altogether didn't have obvious things in common. They were totally unrelated events, totally unrelated binaries doing different things. The only thing that they could find in there, which could be a possible explanation for this thing, would be that they're all compiled in Delphi with a Bob soft compiler, and some of them even show that they're packed with UPX. But I really think the Delphi compiler is fault. But then going on to Google, we found another possible explanation within a Dilbert comic. Going on, we did an overall analysis of the original file names of our APT malware, and we figured out, so most likely you get them by the Internet Explorer.exe. Other interesting names on our list is the rundll32.exe, the Opera browser, which is also really dangerous, and the host.exe. More interesting findings we had when looking closer at the timestamp. Here's an event that was reported originally by FireEye about a long-running cyber espionage operation, which was actually running since apparently 1996, where the actors, I mean, if you look at the other timestamps, you can see that it's been 2007, 8, 2010 until 2013. And there's this one timestamp which just really doesn't fit in, so I do have the suspicion that someone there tried to fake a timestamp and just didn't look what his colleagues were doing. Another interesting timestamp was this one, found within an event of hacking team malware, where you see that someone was just really not good at faking it and put a timestamp that's way too high. And we had another case where actually all the colleagues in the team were really good at faking the timestamp. This is just a 0 timestamp, so if you set the compilation timestamp to 0, the system will try to add that value to the date of the 1st of January 1987, This is the basically 0 day of your computer. Every integer you add to that is like the actual date, as in a difference from the 1st of January 1970. And here they obviously zeroed like all the timestamps, but forgot this one there, which I would consider bad operational security. But that was actually it with our fun facts back to series.
So yeah, they used exploits. Like, yeah, they definitely used some exploit. Well, yeah, that happens. It's not the most common thing. Like in MISP, we can see that we have like over the 300 events of the reduced dataset. Only like between 50 and 68, like the MS detections just found a few more exploits. But like, so it's not the most common thing. Like it's going to be used sometimes, but like, not that often in APTs.
One interesting case, though, where we went a bit deeper was the CV 2015-5119. This is a vulnerability in the Adobe Flash component that was originally, let's call it, owned by a hacking team and got lost at some point in time, and then went wild on the internet. So this was a vulnerability, actually an exploit that was used by a hacking team, and then after the hacking team breach, went into an exploit kit and several APT attacks. Looking into our data, we found this the absolute rock star on the scene because it was used afterwards by 3 different APT actors and 1 unknown actor who was targeting the US government. The others were Group WECB, the Blue Thermite APT, and Black Energy, which all picked up on that single exploit. So thank you, hacking team.
And that's like all the vulnerabilities we found in the reduced dataset. And as you can see, like it's only 32 different vulnerabilities. And in those 32 vulnerabilities, 23 times it was the same that was used over and over and over. And this one, it's Office vulnerability on an RTF file, if I remember correctly. And it was used, like people really loved it. And as you can see, it's a really old vulnerability. But as you know, people suck at patching, so this one was still working like extremely often in recent attacks.
Sophistication. There was another point on our to-do list. We wanted to find out how sophisticated is the actual APT malware in comparison to standard malware. And well, what I would say, like reverse engineering malware, what's making it difficult to reverse engineer a binary are things like heavy obfuscation, like tricky runtime packers. If you have plugins and you miss like the most important plugin of your framework, if you lack certain information to reverse engineer a binary, or if you find something that you didn't see before. What the general media or the general reporting on APT is usually considering sophisticated is how long a specific APT was on a network and how much data got lost, counted in stolen data records, which is really not important if you measure sophistication of an attack, just the incapabilities of the victim. It's also not a measure of sophistication how many different malwares were used in an attack or how long they stayed on the network, or that someone actually took the time to write a dedicated thread just for you. So altogether, the science for an advanced adversary basically boiled down to how much money went into the development. If someone wrote a sophisticated framework with lots of components just for your network, you're important. If someone bought a rat on the internet, modified it, and attacked you and 20 other people, you're not that important. Just to get some equality in there. So here's an example for one of the rats that was really not that sophisticated. For me, analyzing APT malware, I usually find that they're easy to analyze because they usually don't come with runtime packers, they don't come with obfuscation. They come like plain, and you can just do like here string listings and find interesting strings in there that basically tell you a lot already about the binary. And this really, in most cases, this is the usual thing, but I didn't have a number to put on there how much malware actually comes obfuscated or packed. So what we did with our researchers, we went on to do runtime packer detection. We used the data that we grabbed out of the binaries to try to find out how many of our samples are actually packed. Here you see the result, to show you the result before the method. Here you see like a big red bar on the left side where there's the value 0. This means that we found 0 indicators in all of these samples that there was any packing going on, any anomaly in the actual binary. Here the other bars show the actually packed samples. If you look here, 180 is about the value that the UPX packer would get on my Scala. The Scala that we built for detecting runtime packers is a pretty simple one, actually. Pretty simple in comparison to what's been actually out there. So we built a runtime packer considering that PID was broken. If you've ever worked on binaries and you try to find out if they're packed and use PID, you might have found out that your sample was packed with armadillo, because PID usually tells you that the sample is packed with armadillo. And if that was true, in reality, I would be a very unhappy reverse engineer, because armadillo just sucks for reverse engineers. So we built a different evaluation based on the binary attributes that we collected. Thereafter would be the entry point section, so which section the entry point of the binary would be located in, the respective entropy of the section. So the entry point usually points to the code section, and if the code section has a very high entropy, that means that the code is not normal. Let's put it like that. It's usually packed or obfuscated. So the entropy should be about 6.5 for a usual binary. We said if that's higher or significantly lower than that value, we consider that a factor in the evaluation. We also looked how many API calls are being called within the binary. This was something the Python script would do, just count the API calls that the code section contained, because this is also an indicator for how much actual code execution is happening within that code section. We also looked at the section count at the TLS section, I think, and whether the imp hash was present or missing, because interestingly, a missing imp hash or a mistake in calculating the imp hash value for the import type of the binary was somehow related to the binary being packed or not. And to prove that method, or to show that this actually works, we tried the same evaluation method on a just random sample set, and we got this kind of statistic, which made me super happy, because if I looked at that stat and compared it with the other one, I saw that the zero value is really low. This sample set I picked out of an antivirus database of malware samples, and they were chosen, so the sample set was about as big as the other sample set, and the samples were chosen based on the fact that the emulator within this antivirus engine was able to emulate them. So these are PE binaries that are being run within the emulator, so they're runnable, they work, and they're picked from within the time frame. So there's certain randomness within the samples, and I would really say this is rather quite random malware with interesting results. So much about the packers. But there's another value that tells us about sophistication of an attacker, which is mentioned before. If someone wrote a dedicated thread just for you, you're important. If you bought it on the internet, you're not that important. And with this hypothesis, we went on to see how many commodity rats were contained in our data set. Because with the cozy comfort of commodity rats, you just buy a toolkit on the web, or you buy your rat, you modify it, and you use it against your adversary. And you don't have to write your own malware, because writing your own malware is A, not easy. People make a lot of mistakes here, and B, it's not cheap. You put a lot of time and effort in there, and that's just not the best thing to do for every attacker. So why not just buy it? There's a rather quite big market for malware out there. Also, some legitimate businesses jumped onto that market, and one of these businesses you might have heard of, Hacking Team, just got breached last year, but they were like big in the business to build malware and sell it to certain entities who used it. One of my favorite actors on that field to use recycled rats was PACKRAT. PACKRAT, that's a report from Citizen Lab that came out last year. That was a South American threat actor, mainly targeting entities in South America, in Ecuador, Venezuela, Argentina, and Brazil. And I liked the report a lot, but it was quite boring because it didn't put the actual PACKRAT on the picture. Anyway, the most important entity being targeted by that actor was Alberto Nisman. That's an Argentinian prosecutor who was shot dead last year in his apartment. And he had an alien spy rat on his phone at the time, but it was actually built for his computer. So it was targeted by an alien spy rat. That's a Java rat that also can be bought and just modified on the internet. Other malware that actor used were CyberGate and ExtremeRat, which are two more commodity rats. So we picked that case on to search in our data set how many commodity rates we actually found in there, which is quite hard because therefore you would have to look into all the binaries and see if they're related to known commodity rates. So we chose to go the way to use antivirus for help to find all the do-it-yourself APTs. We did this with detections from the Microsoft Defender. I know there's biased views about antivirus, but Microsoft Defender is actually one of the tools that provides good naming or accurate naming for malware that they know. They don't find everything. They're really not that great with detections, but they're good with naming. So we used their names. And then we had to rename their names because it's Microsoft, so they like to put their own stuff on there, and map them back to a set of known reds. Therefore, we used Dark Comet, Black Shades, Advent, Plugix, Poison Ivy, and Extreme Red. These are all families that are considered commodity reds that you just buy, as mentioned. And we took these as a subset for our case study. There's more out there, I know, but as mentioned, it's quite hard to find these reds in a big data set. And what did they find in there? There's one family that's just the king of lazy APTing because it pops up so much. Insiders might know that Plugix is the favorite red of a lot of potentially Chinese actors. Can't say Chinese because we don't do attribution, but yeah, I've never said that. Anyway, Plugix pops up a lot. We see 15 different events where Plugix reds are being found or have been used. And you also can see the number of reds in there is quite considerable. The rest of the pack, as mentioned before, Dark Comet, Advent, Poison Ivy, and the others. You see also a lot of samples, especially with Advent, has been used a lot, and the dedicated event counters. And if you have a closer look at the data thereafter, you see that almost a quarter of the events we analyzed was associated with commodity reds. So almost a quarter of these attackers or of these groups were using reds that they didn't write themselves. And they're not any less successful just because they don't write the malware themselves. Okay.
So that's a bunch of correlations we found between some events. So the main advantage of using MISP for that and using those kind of data is that if a company is targeted by something and they don't really, there is no name for that for now, and the name comes on later. Let's say, for example, if you take this one, like there is an event called just RTF spearphishing in 2014. And later on, there is like the malware has been named, and it was PT Tiger. And you can find out which kind of events or which kind of attacker use different kind of techniques afterward. Like you have the first event, and then you find correlations later on. So it's really interesting to do that because at the beginning, you don't necessarily know if it's something that is like widespread, if many different attackers use the same kind of things, or if it's just if you were the only target, or if a vendor was working on it in the meantime. And like, it's really interesting when you are a company and you find something happening in your network, then you can find correlations with vendor reports, especially. And it's a really, really cool thing to do to just save spare time on your side when you do an analysis. So that's just a bunch of the correlations. There are many, many more. And yeah, like it's just like start if you're interested by that, just ask us and we will ask me and we will give you access to the platform so you can actually use it and save time.
You can actually spend a lot of time digging in these APTs. That's what we did. That's very, very time consuming after all. But we had some interesting findings, especially considering that the reports that are put into MISP, they have a timestamp, so they have a time relation, and there are sometimes reports that overlap that are reported like in a short time frame, and then you have reports that overlap that are reported in a long time frame. The ones that are reported in a long time frame are especially interesting for us because it means we might have seen an actor evolving over time. So we accept that vendors pick up the same APTs and make up new reports out of it, but for us, it's still interesting if we have APTs that might have a different name but are the same thing and they share events, that they add capabilities over time. This we saw a lot. But what we also saw a lot in our correlations were events that just like overlapped 100%. So one vendor picked up an APT and published a report on it in 2012. The next guy published a report on it in 2013. And they still had all the same samples in there. So they basically did the same research, and on the other side, the attacker didn't change his techniques or his malware. So if we could use that data set to keep track of the different actors, we could protect networks better in the future if we knew what happened in the past. You know what I mean? One case of interesting correlations in terms of political issues was the, here, plug-X in Russia and Korblak military, Afghanistan, Tajikistan. What's interesting there, this is this one sample where I showed you the string dump before with the Spanish strings in there. I'm not sure if this is the same actor, but for me it was interesting that they were active in Russia and then in Afghanistan and Tajikistan, and used the red you obviously bought somewhere from a Spanish author. What we also found in there is that the naming of these reports, first of all, yeah, of course, it's all like a bit clown scenery because they have names like Poison Tandor or Scarlet Mimic, and I found something like a moth, king moth or something. Anyway, I don't know who comes up with these names, but for us it's interesting that frequently you have really the same APT with different names on there, and if these reports are published in a short time frame, you can literally see how there's one vendor saying, I analyzed it, I'm going to publish it, and then the other vendor says like, he published that, I analyzed the same thing, I'm going to publish it too, with a different name. And then you have like the reports popping up describing the same thing. As mentioned before, what we tried to do with the data was, first of all, actor tracking. So we picked out a case study of the Operation Blockbuster, that were the guys that attacked Sony, where the whole world was shocked that someone had hacked Sony, and afterwards was really entertained going through the data that was leaked from Sony. And we went on to track that event in our data set. We figured out this link to another APT where samples and infrastructure of the malware has been shared, which is called Operation Troy. Operation Troy has been reported in 2012, and it has the subtitle Cyber Espionage in South Korea. Then we found another link to a blog post from a vendor called Doozer Backdoor Trojan Targets South Korea to Take Over Computers. I personally think that's a very interesting title to give for an APT report. But anyway, that report came out in 2015, and note again, there's South Korea in the title. So the same actor that attacked Sony attacked someone else in South Korea, and then again attacked someone else in South Korea. I know after the Sony attack, there were people coming and saying it's North Korea, and the rest of the community is like no. And I'm still not saying it's North Korea, but it's been interesting that the same guy was in South Korea and then again in South Korea, just saying. And we did the same kind of correlation on another campaign called Turbo Campaign. It was interesting for us that the same thing has been reported in 2014. Back then it has been called Shell Crew. Now it's called Turbo Campaign, still whatever. But what's interesting for us is that now in 2016, they feature a 64-bit Linux Trojan, which back then they hadn't. So for us, that's a case where we can see that an actual actor who's still using the same malware adds more capabilities to his set of attack. So this way, we could try to track this actor further. If further reports about his activity pop up, we could see how he's developing over time. The naming of malware, as mentioned before, we have a lot going on in the naming of APTs. I think there's more energy going in there than in the naming of IKEA furniture, because usually, as I said, you have vendors writing reports, and you have another vendor who realizes, oh my God, that's my malware, I'm going to publish it too. Then you have cases coming up where you have one APT getting like 4 names. That's all the same actor, and all these reports came out within, I think the first 3 came out within 2 weeks, and the 4th one took a bit more time and came out 2 months later because you had to add more data. But it's all the same thing. And we found another case in our data set where actually one vendor came out with a report about the white elephant APT, and then it took him 2 years more to come out with another report on the same actor, then calling it 7-pointed dagger. It's like, oops. But interesting, in the middle of it, oops, there was a 3rd report commenting on the same group, giving it an actually serious title, mentioning that it attacked the Burmese government. And a 3rd case of actual overlap of these 2 groups. There were 2 reports coming out within a few days, one on the 28th of June and the other one on the 30th of June or something like that, having an overlap of actually 100%. So all the samples in there were duplicates. 2 different vendors, 2 different reports, big logos. Amazing. Okay, so much about the correlations. That was actually our talk, and now we tell you what we're going to do in the future.
So yeah, in the future, so all the code we developed for the talk will be published like in a couple of hours. I just need to open the repository and GitHub. It will be in the MISP project. So like if you go on GitHub MISP, you will find out all the code we did for this research. All of it is going to be implemented in the next couple of months in MISP as a default module. So you'll be able to basically do all those correlations on a lot of the manual work we had to do immediately from MISP. You will just be able to get data out of MISP, correlate it mostly in the Redis database. If you want to have something that is more sustainable on the long run. You can put everything in Redis and do all the queries we did, and generate all the data we generated like right away from your MISP instance. Another idea will be to use MISP as a verified dataset. So the idea is that we have all those attributes with a lot of really cool metadata and information about where it comes from and different names and so on. And then we have, like probably all have a bunch of datasets containing huge amount of samples, and you have no idea what it is. Like I have on the machine like 400 gigs of random sample coming from everywhere, and I don't know what is in it. And I cannot do anything with it because all those data are just like completely random. But if I can correlate all those samples with MISP events, it will be really, really interesting to find out those samples and if it works. But like it's going to be some research to do in the future. Then we'll also provide Bloom filters. So the idea with the Bloom filter project I developed to correlate those samples with the events ID is that you can export from MISP all the attributes, you hash them, you put them in Redis, and then you can do all the queries and you can export this database away from your core systems and go to clients and whatsoever to with those attributes that are not in clear text. You cannot, like if you lose the database, you don't really lose anything important because everything is rehashed. So like I take like an IP, hash it, put it in Redis, and then you can just query it. So it's really, really efficient. You can do a lot of queries, and you will not lose any kind of data even if you run it in a computer that you don't really trust. And you can use it with your clients or customers or whatsoever without giving them all your data. We will do classifications on even more attributes because we just did it on P files and domains and IPs, but we can definitely add some more things, API calls and so on. And so we will definitely try to correlate even more events directly from MISP and the samples to find out more interesting correlations between the campaigns. And if you are interested to get access to those data, yeah, they are usually TLP green, so you cannot pass them on internet, and we cannot really give you the whole database of stuff we used. But if you are working for a company, we can give you access to it. Just get in touch with me, and we will see how we can do that. We'll basically just need a PGP key. Yeah, so that's basically what we will do in the next month, and possibly propose another talk at some point in the future.
All right, that much for our talk. We thank you very much for your attention. And if you have questions,
so Marian, Raphael, thank you very much. Questions, please. We have time for questions.
Hello. I have a question about the correlation part. In the correlation part, you mentioned about many interesting links between instance and campaigns and groups. I want to know how do you usually do to link between different incident or different espionage groups, because sometimes some malware might be confirmed shared by many different groups. So I want to know how do you link this instance. Thank you.
When the similar attributes, like if we find that a malware was using like specific file name, using specific exploit, and used at some time, and like if two different organizations or two different attackers will use the same kind of samples, we created a correlation. So yeah, that's and for the, as we said, for the community rats, it's clear that many attackers will also use the same rats because they will just buy it. But yeah, and then we use the correlations also on the network level. Like if two events use the same kind of, or the same IPs, the same domains, we also create a correlations.
The strongest correlations that we can get of the data set is through infrastructure. So if we see the same CNC servers pop up in two different events, we kind of consider that the two events related or the actor related, because I don't think someone's stealing the CNC server when stealing the malware or buying the malware. But what we actually can't guarantee with our data set is the accuracy of the reports that went into the database. So these are vendor reports that listed samples, that listed CNC servers. If the report contains errors, which we found, there is errors in vendor reports, and they went into MISP, we have inaccuracies in our data set. This is something we are not able yet to pick out like automatically, but we see it when we analyze the samples themselves. We see like this sample just really doesn't fit to this event. We consider that a mistake in the actual reporting.
More questions?
So how can you be sure that, like, when you correlate like a CNC to another CNC, the hackers are not playing like a disinformation campaign kind of game? Like they do it on purpose to cover their tracks and then confuse your job?
Well, based on the data, we can't.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it will happen, but like when we have many attributes, like few IPs on few domains, like the probability that they use the same infrastructure is quite high. So it's like, we can never have 100% certitude because it's just like, attacker will also play with analysts for sure. It's just that when we have more than one attribute, especially on the network part, the probability is higher that it's actually related.
Another quick thing, how many times you noticed like that the exploit that was used was actually a 0-day? Just a few times, I guess.
We didn't really check that out practically, but like
It's hard to verify because, of course, we have a timestamp on the report. We have a timestamp on the event in MISP, but we do not actually know when these attackers used their exploits. So the actual indicator that we have that this was a 0-day that they applied was if the vendor who reported mentioned that in his report and if he was right. So if these two factors are there, we can say it's a 0-day. But for this research now, we didn't get to the point where we read like through all the reports which mentioned vulnerabilities to see if it were 0-day. But based on the CVE numbers, or based on the time, like on the CVEs that were used, we would say that the number is really low. Because you saw like the one that was most used was from 2012, and the others on that slide, I remember were from 2013 and 2015. Could be 0 days, but the chances are really low.
Or could be just a reuse of like the vulnerabilities patch, and they just use it because it's more, because they can just pay less at this point. Yeah.
Could you comment a little bit more about MISP as a community? Because some of that didn't come through, because these questions would be addressed by some of that.
Yeah. So MISP is an open source platform that you can install internally in your organization, and you can connect it to all the other instances, to other companies or with us, and this way you can basically share you can share indicators. Like you can choose which indicator you want to share. You have sharing groups. You can decide how far you want it to be shared. Like it's just you have a lot of flexibility in how you want to share indicators. And the idea is to help and to make it easier for like the community to get access to those indicators, sorted like in a sorted way, not just in a PDF, in a print screen of an Excel sheet in a PDF, like with actual data, with IPs and domains and directly accessible and searchable. So it's really like the idea of MISP is really to have a community-based platform where you can share all your indicators. And if you don't want to share, you can at least store them internally in your organization in a classified way. Like you don't have to just dig into a bunch of text files lying around on 10 computers. Like just the way we use it at Circle is when we analyze the sample, we just directly put everything in MISP right away. We don't store it anywhere else. And we share it as much as we can.
I don't have a question. I just want to take a photograph of this great, amazing, handwritten slide with the...
Oh.
Artwork. Could take a while.
Yeah, it's...
By the way, that was artwork made by Raphael. Yeah. Very proud of him for his first slide design intentions.
Yeah, it was more efficient than me using LaTeX for that. Yeah, so that's the idea. Yeah.
We tried to use a computer and we failed.
Yeah, like it's just. I mean, at least I can.
Don't be ashamed. This is serious.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. And I didn't make it that clear, but like the SQLite thing here is also if you want to run the same correlations without using Redis and without using like your whole infrastructure, you'll see it's a bit complicated in the repo. You can just run it and create an SQLite file and have it locally. It may be more complicated if you have hundreds of thousands of samples, but at least you can run it locally if you have a small-ish amount.
And I don't know how to use Redis.
And also, the SQLite version works on Windows, which is not the case for the other one, because I don't know Windows.
I do.
Okay, so if there are no additional questions, Mario and Raphael, thank you very much.